Hello and welcome to another episode of the Symphonic podcast. My name is Bernardo Miethe.
And I'm Andrew Owen.
And today we're going to be talking about Hector Berlioz. He was born in, let's just get right into it today.
Okay, sure.
He was born in 1803 and he died in 1869. Berlioz's father was a doctor and a prominent citizen of La Côte Saint-André. As a child, he was taught the flute and guitar and began to compose when he was 14. Even as a child, his mind responded vividly to romantic literature, both French and Latin, and he felt the impulse always to express the response in musical form. At the age of 17, he went to Paris to pursue a medical career, remaining there for the rest of his life.
Yeah, I mean, he liked medicine, right?
Supposedly.
But he didn't stay there very long. So in Paris, his encounter with music, especially opera, weakened his already slight interest in medicine. He soon abandoned those studies in favor of a career as a composer, taking lessons with Le Sœur, and later attending the Conservatoire. And you have to forgive my really thick French accent. What can I say? It's perfect. I know.
It is.
No. He became an habitué of the opéra and a profound admirer of the French tradition, especially Gluck and Spontini, which ironically aren't that French of composers. Mm-hmm. In the face of parental displeasure, he earned a living at first by singing in a theater chorus and by giving guitar lessons, though later he became best known as a critic and a conductor. The guy never actually played the piano. He was just a guitarist. Mm-hmm. His instrument was the orchestra, as we'll learn about later.
Yeah.
The occupation of journalism sustained him throughout his working life, so he did have a day job. And though he declared a profound distaste for it, he was one of the most perceptive and vital writers of his time.
Mm-hmm. Several strong passions determined the development of Berlioz's music. After Gluck, he discovered Weber and later Beethoven. He greatly disliked Rossini and Italian music. In 1827, he was introduced to Shakespeare's plays, followed soon after by Goethe's Faust, and other of his favorite writers admired also by leading figures of French Romanticism were Chateaubriand, Thomas More, Byron, Scott, Fenimore Cooper, and E.T.A. Hoffmann, as well as the younger French writers themselves like Victor Hugo, Alfred de Vigny, and Auguste Barbier, and others.
Yeah, he was fascinated by literature.
Yeah.
That's part of, why we call it the Romantic period, other than it being romantic. Like, we think of romance as dealing with literature.
Yeah.
So he's really one of our good people bringing literature into music. So Berlioz's first substantial musical composition, of course, was a mass which he wrote in 1824. He later disowned it. He didn't like the piece so much. It was rediscovered in Belgium in 1992 and was found to foreshadow a number of passages in his mature works. It had some of the bits of music that he would later use that might have had something to do with when he canned it. The mass was followed by an opera, Le Franc Juge. You gotta love French. Which is mostly lost. From 1826 to 1830, he competed annually for the Prix de Rome, but won it only on his fifth attempt, because he just wasn't that good. No, that's not the case. An overpowering passion for the Irish Shakespearean actress Harriet Smithson, whom he first saw in 1827, led to the composition in 1830 of the Symphonie Fantastique, his first masterpiece, a 5-movement program symphony in which the tale of unrequited love is recounted. There's so many fun things to say about Miss Smithson.
Yes. He was kind of a creep too, man.
He was definitely a creep. He's the kind of guy that if you saw at a bar, you would just ignore.
That's true.
As best you could.
That is true.
The guy went nuts.
He was completely obsessed. After he won the Prix de Rome, this gave Berlioz a scholarship for 5 years, the first 2 of which were spent away from Paris, mostly in Rome. He returned in 1832 with Lelio, a sequel to the Symphonie Fantastique, which includes parts for solo singers, a chorus, and an actor. He was introduced to Harriet Smithson, declared his love, and married her in 1833. Settling down to 9 years of constant labor as a composer, critic, and conductor. A series of works came in close succession in this period. He wrote Harold in Italy, a symphony with viola solo, written in 1834. He also wrote the opera Benvenuto Cellini from 1836, which was played at the opera in 1838 and rejected by Parisian public. He wrote the Requiem, Grand Messe de Morts, written in 1837. He also wrote Romeo and Juliet, which is a large choral symphony from 1839. He wrote the Grande Symphonie Funèbre et Triomphale for military band, written in 1840. And the song cycle Le Nuit d'Et from 1841. He also wrote many smaller songs and choruses in this period and gave several concerts every season. He received 2 government commissions but secured no permanent position in Paris.
So yeah, in 1842, Berlioz began a series of concert tours to Belgium and Germany and Austria, and for the next 20 years was frequently abroad. The guy went all around. He traveled many times to Germany, 5 times to London, and twice to Russia. La Damnation de Faust was composed during one such tour in 1845 to 46. The gradual failure of his marriage and the awareness of more appreciative audiences abroad kept him almost constantly on the move. He became disillusioned and embittered about Paris, especially after the failure of La Damnation de Faust, and he watched with sadness the general decline in taste and artistic fervor in the latter part of his life. He became gradually less and less inclined to undertake new compositions as he aged.
His Te Deum was composed in 1849, and a brief choral work, La Fuite en Egypte, which is The Flight into Egypt, from 1850. Thereafter, Berlioz wrote no music for 3 years and was persuaded only with difficulty to enlarge this work into a choral trilogy, L'Enfance du Christ, which is the infancy of Christ, whose great and unexpected success in 1854 in part encouraged him to embark on the largest and grandest work of his whole output, which is the Les Troyens, which is the Trojans, which is a 5-act opera based on Virgil. He had contemplated this ambitious project for many years and finally set it down from 1856 to 1858. He never succeeded in getting it performed complete, but a truncated version of the last 3 acts was staged in Paris in 1863. He also wrote the comic opera Beatrice and Benedict, based on Shakespeare's Much Ado About Nothing, and this was staged at Baden-Baden in 1862.
Yeah, we did that here at LSU about a year ago-ish.
Yeah.
It was
pretty fun.
It's done. It was a lot of fun. I had a good time.
Yeah.
Had a good time with that. So the last dozen years of Berlioz's life were chronically affected by Crohn's disease. And after 1863, he sank into a deepening despair, especially after the death of his only son, Louis, in 1867. He died in 1869. His memoirs, compiled over a long period, were published in 1870. So, as I said earlier, Berlioz was no pianist. He wrote no solo music for the instrument, nor is there any chamber music. His works use voices and instruments in many combinations and in many genres. I mean, more than pretty much anyone before him. I mean, he was able to do these strange colors and new sounds. He made a special study of orchestral technique and instrumentation and published a treatise on the subject, the Grand Traité d'instrumentation des orchestrations modernes, which I guess just means the large treatise on instrumentation and modern orchestration. It's, the English translation was published in 1855 on the French 1843 version. He also wrote a handbook on conducting, Le Chef d'Orchestre. That's right. All orchestras must have a chef.
A chef.
No, the head of the orchestra, the chef, the main one. In 1855, he wrote this book. So he was big on conducting. That also was a relatively new genre to begin with. 1856, people hadn't been conducting for terribly long, as we talked about in the first podcast. His orchestral style is distinctive and brilliant, and it greatly influenced future developments that other composers like Liszt and Wagner and the Russians would later do. So Liszt was, for a long period, one of Berlioz's closest friends. He never established the same rapport with Wagner, however, though their encounters were usually fraternal and friendly.
Yeah. So he wrote many songs with piano accompaniment, and the better ones such as La Captive from 1832 and Le Nuit d'Et, written between 1840 and 1841, were later orchestrated. None of his music is abstract or purely formal. Each work has a poetic or evocative title, or a song text, or a program. And this literary or pictorial content determines its style, its instrumentation, its mood, and its form. His pieces thus often fall between established genres such as concerto and symphony, opera and cantata, or scene and song. Much of it relates to his favorite literature or personal experience. like the Symphonie Fantastique and Lelio, sprang from two love affairs. Shakespeare inspired the Tempest Overture in 1830, King Lear Overture in 1831, a group of Hamlet pieces written in 1844, Romeo and Juliet from 1839, Beatrice and Benedict from 1862. Goethe inspired his from Faust inspired his huge scenes, the Faust, written in 1829, and its fuller composition, La Damnation de Faust, from 1846. And also from Scott came overtures Waverley from 1827 and Rob Roy from 1831. Byron and his own travels inspired Harold in Italy from 1834. So a lot of inspiration, and it's not just writing music because it's music. It's
right.
Like everything has a meaning behind it for him.
Pretty much nothing he writes is just music for music's sake.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everything has some kind of extra musical meaning.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he's going for. That's why we teach him in music appreciation classes as the program symphony guy, the guy that writes program music.
Yeah.
His Grand Symphonie Funèbre et Triomphale is a ceremonial work for military band. You have to forgive my slowness in reading French. I really don't speak a word of the language. Deriving in style from the stirring outdoor music of the French Revolution, this piece is. The Grand Messe de Mort, the Requiem, is related to the same tradition, with its four groups of brass added to the huge orchestral and choral forces. Berlioz called the Te Deum the brother of the Requiem, it being also conceived for large forces, including a chorus of 600 children, which is just enough.
A lot.
Just enough people, and a large building. He also insisted on the proper relationship of music to its spatial surroundings, hating noisy music in small theaters, but exploiting the extraordinary effects of well-distributed masses in great architectural spaces. So this guy was interested in the spatial, where you put the instrument and how big the actual room is. He is writing for the room. Mm-hmm. When he writes music, which is important to know if you're ever doing his music. So L'Enfance du Christ is a different kind of sacred work, being intimate in scale and devotional in style, though Berlioz was not himself an orthodox believer. Its hints at operatic stage action are found similarly in La Damnation de Faust, which is a dramatic concert work with many suggestions of movement and action, but nonetheless conceived for the theater of the imagination.
Yeah. Berlioz always liked to amplify the seen with the unseen. Thus, the nightmarish devilry of the Symphonie Fantastique is purely to be imagined, not seen. So too are the Will-o'-the-Wisp and the inhabitants of Pandemonium in La Damnation de Faust. In his operas, there are many offstage scenes. In Romeo and Juliet, the love scene is evoked by the orchestra alone. We are left to imagine the lovers' exchange of words. This dependence on the imagination must be coupled with his intrinsic faith in expression as the cornerstone of his aesthetic outlook. He held firm to his belief in the capacity of music to embody images, ideas, and feelings, ranging from the literalness of program music to the less easily defined area where the music reflects its text or subject with as much veracity as possible.
Yeah, the composer's personal identification with the subject and his integrity in presenting it in musical form were paramount. Is the whole thing that he's shooting for here is that the music should be a representation of the composer's own emotions and feelings, and that was the big thing for him. And of course, these ideas are shared by many romantic artists, people outside of music, also visual artists, all these things. And in his early works, Berlioz seems to conform to the popular image of the inspired creative artist, cutting new paths and discarding outworn forms. This guy, he was trying to just branch out into something new. He wanted to be his own man. He's an adult, darn it. But after the innovations of his first works, revolutionary though they were, he preferred to consolidate his style and technique, and he returned more and more to the outlook and classical serenity of Gluck. Les Troyens can be described as a deeply classical work imbued throughout with romantic passion, so sort of a neoclassical romanticism. People are always, I mean, there's no such thing as periods, are there really?
True, that's true.
I mean, we have to sort of take every piece for its own. So although Berlioz admired such contemporary composers as Liszt and Mendelssohn, who were very much contemporaries of him, he took little interest in imitating their music. He did not want to imitate. He remained stylistically aloof and independent instead. Tried to be his own man. He thus had relatively few direct imitators and no pupils. The guy didn't teach really anybody. His music was already strikingly individual, and it can't just be categorized simply.
Yeah, so he seems like a very, almost like a recluse in many aspects. He's trying to be different in a lot of ways. I mean, music, but also in the way that, he didn't teach people, and he's trying to be his own person, I guess. Very romantic.
That's what he's going for.
So his views on all aspects of music were repeatedly and congently expressed in his feuilletons, which are leaflets, for the daily and weekly press. So the misunderstanding from which he suffered in his lifetime and for many years thereafter is hard to comprehend. He published 3 collections of articles which reveal his reverent attitude to the composers he most admired, which were Gluck, Spontini, and Beethoven. His scorn for the pettiness of Parisian music, his longing for a society where the arts might be fostered free of commercialization and self-interest, and his moral sense of humor. Berlioz' creed: passion for art, belief in the exclusive nature of art, and powerful commitment, no matter the odds.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, he was going for individualism above all. Mm-hmm. And he had a very strange life story. I mean, we've already brushed on a lot of it, but the guy was, for all intents and purposes, a little nuts. I mean, before he fell in love with Harriet Smithson, he was actually engaged to another woman. And they got along okay. It's just that when he was traveling off and about, he received word that she was engaged to another man. That other man being the son of the classical composer Ignaz Pleyel, one of Mozart's rivals. Mm-hmm. But this guy, Camille Pleyel, was engaged to be married to to Berlioz's first fiancée. So that was fine. Berlioz didn't take the news well. We're emotional creatures, we humans. So Berlioz devised a really long and complicated plan to assassinate both his ex-fiancée and her new fiancé by poison. Well, he was going to shoot him, but he brought poison in case the pistol jammed. Mm-hmm. But on the train ride over there, he slowly changed his mind, like a lot of guys do when they go to the store and they're in the really long grocery line and they're starting to put away things as they went. I don't really need that. I don't need that. Well, he kind of did that on this long train ride. It's like, well, maybe this is a little nuts. Yeah. And also he had left his disguise in a saddlebag in the previous thing, and he forgot his vial of poison, and just what. He couldn't get anything right. He couldn't even kill his ex-fiancée and her new fiancé. I mean, that's just one little snippet from his life. I mean, not even including what we're about to talk about, Symphonie Fantastique, this piece that's about his obsession with a new woman, an Irish actress named Harriet Smithson. Mm-hmm. So, the Symphonie Fantastique is what we're going to talk about today. This is a program symphony. This is a work in 5 movements that depicts Berlioz's obsession with this woman. This is entirely autobiographical music. So the entire title is Symphonie Fantastique, Épisode de la vie d'un artiste. A fantastic symphony, an episode in the life of an artist. En 5 parties, in 5 parts. This is Berlioz's Opus 14, and it's a program symphony written in 1830. That's one of those years that are drilled into us musicologists, 1830, Symphonie Fantastique. Mm-hmm. It's an important piece of the Romantic period. It's one of those defining moments in Romanticism. When we think of what is Romantic music, the brain of us musicologists tend to go straight to this piece, because he is really branching out of former things, and just letting music, letting the orchestra simply imitate life, mm-hmm. letting it be its own thing. Mm-hmm. It's a popular piece. Concert audiences all over the world have enjoyed this work. It was first performed at the Paris Conservatoire in December 1830. The work was repeatedly revived after that and subsequently became a favorite in Paris. It's never suffered any period of unpopularity.
Yeah, it's great. It's performed all the time. Mm-hmm. Leonard Bernstein described the symphony as the first musical expedition into psychedelia because of its hallucinatory and dreamlike nature, and because history suggests Berlioz composed at least a portion of it under the influence of opium. According to Bernstein, Berlioz tells it like it is. You take a trip You wind up screaming at your own funeral.
Look, it's so simple. You take a trip, you wind up screaming at your own funeral. No big whoop. In 1831, Berlioz wrote a lesser-known sequel to the work, Lelio, for actor, orchestra, and chorus. And Franz Liszt made a piano transcription of this symphony in 1833. This work is not that well known. People do not perform this that often.
Yeah.
To be fair, Symphonie Fantastique is significantly better than that work. But that's okay.
The score calls for a total of over 90 instruments, the most of any symphony written to that time. Though the Symphonie Fantastique calls for only a fairly large orchestra, such conductors as Miethe and Gustavo Dudamel have conducted performances of the work with orchestras of over 200 players. I mean, we know the orchestra's big, but some conductors go all out and put as many.
You just go and double everything.
Double everything.
Yeah, triple everything.
Triple everything, actually. Yeah, extra.
You never want double because then they'll start conflicting with each other, right?
Oh, that's exactly it.
No. So this symphony, this work, it tells a story of an artist who's gifted with a lively imagination. He seems to have poisoned himself with opium in the depths of despair because of hopeless love. This guy is just very much in love with some woman. Could be anybody, right? Harriet Smithson. Berlioz provided his own program notes for each movement of the work, which we'll read in a little bit. He prefaces his notes with the following instructions. Quote, "The composer's intention has been to develop various episodes of the life of an artist, insofar as they lend themselves to musical treatment. As the work cannot rely on the assistance of speech, the plan of the instrumental drama needs to be set out in advance. The following program must therefore be considered as the spoken text of an opera, which serves to introduce musical movements and to motivate their character and expression," unquote.
Like we said before, it has 5 movements, this piece, instead of the classic conventional 4 movements of earlier symphonies. The first movement is called Reveries Passions, which is Reveries and Passions. The second movement, Un bal, which is a dance, a ball.
Mm-hmm.
The third movement, Zin aux camps, which is Scene in the Fields.
Scène au champ.
Scène au champ. Thanks.
French is ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, no offense to our French listeners. I'm just very, very American. I give it a good college try, but...
Oh, me too. The fourth moment, which is Marche à Suspice, which is March to the Scaffold. And the last moment, Song du Nid du Sabbat, which is Dream of the Night of the Sabbath. The fourth moment, Reverie Passion, which is Reveries and Passions. I'm going to read the program, which comes from his program notes from 1845. He writes, quote, "The author imagines that a young musician afflicted by the sickness of spirit, which a famous writer has called the vagueness of passions,
Le vague des passions.
sees for the first time a woman who unites all the charms of the ideal person his imagination was dreaming of, and falls desperately in love with her. Mm-hmm. By a strange anomaly, the beloved image never presents itself to the artist's mind without being associated with a musical idea, in which he recognizes a certain quality of passion, but endowed with the nobility and shyness which he credits up to the object of his love." So I guess this dude is having a trip and he associates this music with the person that he doesn't see her, but he hears this idea.
It's an obsessive musical motive. Mm-hmm. He goes to it over and over again, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm. And this melodic image and its model keep haunting him ceaselessly, like a double idée fixe. Well, let's talk about the idée fixe.
Idée fixe.
The idée fixe is basically that theme that we were just talking about. Is the theme that represents the beloved, which I think is something like. It goes forever. It's long.
It's a very, very long melody.
It's a long melody.
And if you ever talk about this symphony, as long as you say the 2 words idée fixe, people will assume you know what you're talking
Exactly. You don't have to. Yeah, exactly.
You don't have to know a thing about this piece. Just know the 2 words idée fixe, and you'll satisfy every music appreciation teacher in the country, I promise.
So this melody comes back in absolutely every movement of the piece, of course, and it launches the allegro at the beginning. The transition from this stage of dreamy melancholy, interrupted by occasional upsurges of aimless joy, to the leader's passion, with its outburst of fury and jealousy. Its returns of tenderness, its tears, its religious consolations, all this forms the subject of the first movement. The first movement is radical in its harmonic outline, building a vast arc back to the home key, while similarly to the sonata form of the classical period. Parisian critics regarded this as unconventional. It is here that the listener is introduced to the theme of the artist's beloved, or the idée fixe. Throughout the movement, there is a simplicity in the way melodies and themes are presented, which Robert Schumann likened to Beethoven's epigrams, ideas that could be extended had the composer chosen to. In part, it is because Berlioz rejected writing the more symmetrical melodies than in academic fashion.
It was then in fashion.
And instead looked for melodies that were so intense and every note as to defy normal harmonization.
So on to the second movement. It's called a dance, un bal. Again, quoting from Berlioz's program notes, quote, "The artist finds himself in the most diverse situations in life, in the tumult of a festive party, in the peaceful contemplation of the beautiful sights of nature, yet everywhere, whether in town or in the countryside, the beloved image keeps haunting him and throws his spirit into confusion." And that's all it says for that movement. You just gotta love the word idée fixe. That'd be a great name for a cologne. Working on it. See Berlioz's face on the front of the bottle. The second movement has a mysterious sounding introduction that creates an atmosphere of impending excitement, sort of foreboding, which is followed by a passage which is covered with the sounds of two harps. Then the flowing waltz theme appears. Of course, the waltz, for most folks are familiar with the term waltz, as a triple dance. So this thing is derived from the idée fixe at first, and then it transforms. More formal statements of the idée fixe twice interrupt this waltz. So the movement is the only one to feature the two harps. It's a pretty sweet gig for a harpist.
Just have to chill.
Just hang out for a little bit, bring a novel, things are good. Providing the glamour and sensual richness of the ball, and may also symbolize the object of the young man's affection. Berlioz wrote extensively in his memoirs of his trials and tribulations in having this symphony performed, due to a lack of capable harpists and harps, especially in Germany. Poor guy just couldn't find one. We have the same problem in the American South, but I mean, honestly, how many harpists do we really know? Though I did go to a church one time that had like 12 harpists.
Wow.
Right? And they were all children.
Well, that's the future for the South. There's future.
I'm telling you, man, Memphis, Tennessee is a strange place.
Oh man, that's another thing. If you want to be if you want to make money as a musician, study some harp.
Study some harp, man. People, I mean, they won't know to hire you, but if you tell them that you play harp, they will employ you.
They'll call you back.
They'll call you back. So another feature of this movement is that Berlioz added a part for a solo cornet to his autograph score, although it was not included in the score published in his lifetime. Of course, the cornet is like a trumpet, just it looks a little smaller, has a warmer tone, tuned the same. The work has most often been played and recorded without the solo cornet part. Conductors Jean Martinson, Sir Colin Davis, Otto Klemperer, Gustavo Dudamel, and Leonard Slatkin have employed this part for cornet and performances at the symphony. Because it's fun to add stuff, and who doesn't love the cornet?
Yeah.
You can just smell the hot dogs when you hear a good cornet. It's American history and right on your mouth.
Let me go back to the first movement for a second, because I just remember something.
Sure.
One of the reasons why it was very daunting to do a podcast on this particular piece is because there's so much out there about this piece. I mean, we're trying to do the best we can to kind of condense everything into a 30-minute podcast, but there's a lot of really good resources. In YouTube, you can find a lecture by Leonard Bernstein about this piece, and it's fantastic. It's so great. One of the things that he talks in the first moment is he says that what the accompaniment to the melody is like he's comparing the melody with it having a trip, and he's saying because on top of the melody the strings are doing like like this very aggressive thing, and he's like this is like he's saying that this is like the psychedelic part of the piece. It's really great.
Yeah.
I'll put a link. I'll put a link to Bernstein's lecture because it's really good if you want to know a little more about that.
Sure.
So the third moment, which is how do you say?
Scène au champ.
Scène au champ. The scene in the fields. So I'm going to read the notes, the program notes first.
One evening in the countryside, he hears two shepherds in the distance dialoguing with their Hans de Vache. This pastoral duet, the setting, the gentle rustling of the trees in the wind, some causes for hope that he has recently conceived, all conspire to restore to his heart an unaccustomed feeling of calm, and to give to his thoughts a happier coloring. He broods on his loneliness and hopes that soon he will no longer be on his own. But what if she betrayed him? This mingled hope and fear, these ideas of happiness, disturbed by dark premonitions, form the subject of the adagio. At the end, one of the shepherds resumes his Hans de Vache. The other one no longer answers. Distant sound of thunder, solitude, silence.
Yeah.
Unquote.
So the two shepherds Berlioz mentions in the notes are depicted by the English horn. An offstage oboe tossing an evocative melody back and forth. After the English horn oboe conversation, the principal theme of the movement appears on solo flute and violins. Berlioz salvaged this theme from his abandoned Mezzosolemn. The idea fix returns in the middle of the movement, played by oboe and flute. The sound of distant thunder at the end of the movement is a striking passage to 4/4 timpani.
Striking, is it?
Yeah.
If you love timpani, Berlioz is your man.
Mm-hmm.
The dude is aggressive with the timpanis in any piece that uses them. The fourth movement, the one after the one we just talked about, is Marche au Supplice, the March to the Scaffold. So Berlioz's program notes read this, quote, "Convinced that his love is unappreciated, the artist poisons himself with opium. The dose of narcotic, while too weak to cause his death, plunges him into a very heavy sleep, accompanied by the strangest of visions. He dreams that he has killed his beloved, that he is condemned, led to the scaffold, and is witnessing his own execution. As he cries for forgiveness, the effects of the narcotics set in. He wants to hide, but he cannot, so he watches on as an onlooker as he dies. The procession advances to the sound of a march that is sometimes somber and wild, and sometimes brilliant and solemn, in which a dull sound of heavy footsteps follows without transition the loudest outbursts. At the end of the march, the first 4 bars of the Idée Fixe reappear like a final thought of love interrupted by a fatal blow when his head bounces down the steps." Unquote. And I do encourage you to actually listen to that part, because it's stupid. Come on, Berlioz having to literally depict in sound. Whoa, yeah. Okay, sorry headphone people. Berlioz claimed to have written the fourth movement in a single night. I promise you, Hector, I really do believe you. No. No, I'm kidding. He reconstructed music from an unfinished project, his opera Le Fin Juge. The movement here begins with the timpani doing sextuplets and thirds, for which he directs, quote, "The first quaver of each half bar is to be played with 2 drumsticks, the other 5 with the right hand drumsticks." So lots of just very strong percussive section here. So the movement proceeds as a march, filled with blaring horns and rushing passages, and scurrying figures that later show up in the last movement. Before the musical depiction of his execution, there's a brief nostalgic recollection of the Idée Fixe, where you can sort of see him looking up and he sees in the crowd Harriet, or whoever this obsession is about, Harriet. And he sees her and he thinks of the Idée Fixe shortly before his head is chopped off. And of course, this is all in a dream. He's just dreaming having his head chopped off. Because, I mean, if it were really the case, the piece would end right there, right?
Sure.
Okay, so the brief recollection of the Idée Fixe happens in a solo clarinet part. It's almost the only thing that you hear, as though representing the last conscious thought of the soon-to-be executed man. Immediately following this is a single short fortissimo G minor chord, the fatal blow of the guillotine blade, followed by a series of pizzicato notes representing the rolling of the severed head into the basket. After his death, the final 9 bars of the movement contain a victorious series of G major brass chords, along with rolls of the snare drums within the entire orchestra, seemingly intended to convey the cheering of the onlooking throng. And this is the movement that the textbook I taught out of chose to share with people, was the fourth movement. just because it's so literal.
Yeah.
The whole head being chopped off thing.
The last movement, which is Son de Nuit du Sabbat, the dream of the night of the Sabbath. The program notes, he sees himself at a witch's Sabbath, in the midst of a hideous gathering of shades, sorcerers, and monsters of every kind who have come together to his funeral. Strange sounds, groans, outbursts of laughter, distant shouts, which seem to be answered by more shouts. The beloved melody appears once more, but has now lost its noble and shy character. It is now no more than a vulgar dance tune, trivial and grotesque. It is she who is coming to the Sabbath. Roar of delight at her arrival, she joins the diabolical orgy. The funeral kneel trolls, burlesque parody of the Dies Irae, the dance of the witches. This dance combined with the Dies Irae. So of course the Dies Irae is the chant.
Dies Irae, Dies Irae,
and this, so he combines the Dies Irae with the Idefix, and it's like a crazy, tumultuous dance. This movement can be divided into sections according to tempo changes. The introduction is largo, in common time, creating an ominous quality through dynamic variation and instrumental effects, particularly in the strings, the tremolos, pizzicatos, forçandos, and that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah, at bar 21 of the movement, the tempo changes to allegro, and the meter changes to 6/8. The return of the Idefix as a vulgar dance tune is depicted by the C clarinet. I don't know if you've ever heard of C clarinet, they're delightful little instruments. This is interrupted by an allegro assai section in cut common time over in bar 29.
The Idefix then returns as a prominent E-flat clarinet solo at bar 40. It's in 6/8 and allegro. The E-flat clarinet contributes a sharper, more shrill timbre than the C clarinet. Of course, the E-flat clarinet is the piccolo clarinet.
E-flat clarinet is hilarious. I think if you enjoy the sound of a B-flat clarinet, and you even more like the sound of the E-flat clarinet
Is what you want.
It's the perfect clarinet. If you could just have an orchestra of only E-flat clarinets, I can imagine it'd just be the most extraordinary sound. It's very squeaky, very shrill sound.
Yeah.
No offense to E-flat clarinet specialists.
No, that was he was going for that though.
He was absolutely going for that, but I'm not sure the inventor of the E-flat clarinet. Totally appreciative. Okay, so at bar 80, there is one bar of alla breve where you go very fast. The descending quarter notes in unison through the entire orchestra flow through this section. Again in 6/8, this section sees the introduction of tubular bells and fragments of the witches' round dance. Dang, dang, dang. It's just this fun little talk. It's quite horrendously Halloweeny. I think everyone should enjoy it right around the time of Halloween, if you're into Halloween.
Sure. The Dies Irae begins at bar 127. The motif derived from the 13th century Latin sequence, like we said. It is initially stated in the unison between the unusual combination of 4 bassoons and 2 tubas. So it's like a very low, of course, very low statement.
Yeah, so at bar 222, so this has several bars in it, this piece. The witch's round dance motive is repeatedly stated in the strings, to be interrupted by 3 syncopated notes in the brass. This those 3 notes. This leads to the Ronde du Sabbat, the Sabbath round at bar 241, where the motive finally is expressed in full.
And the Dies Irae at Ronde du Sabbat ensemble section is at bar 414, so it's pretty long, I guess. I mean, it's a lot of bars, but it goes kind of fast.
It goes by really fast.
Yeah. There are a host of effects, including Iri con leño in the strings, which is when you hit the strings with the other part of the bow, you actually hit it with the wood of the bow, which that's what it means. Con leño means with wood, basically.
But you'll scratch the bow. You don't want to ruin the bow.
Oh, it's the effect. It's really cool, and the first movement is awesome, dude.
I remember I sat with your major professor when he was teaching us how to use the string instruments. And whenever he does col leño, he used to play violin. He doesn't anymore, I don't think. But he doesn't use the wood side. He just hits it with the hair. Just hits it, instead of actually. Because he said, I only did it once, and look at what happened to the backside of this cheap violin. So it is there are some hazards involved with playing this piece.
This con leño it represents the bubbling of the witch's cauldron to the blast of the wind. There's a lot of effects that represent a lot of things. The climatic finale combines the somber Dies Irae melody with the wind fugue of the Rondo Sabbat. Berlioz explains that the aim of the second kind of imitation is to reproduce the intonations of the passions and the emotions, and even to trace musical image or metaphor of objects that can only be seen. The continual interruption of the Dies Irae motif by the string symbolizes this continual fight of death until the moment and peace eventually, as we all do into the Dies Irae theme, and our eventual but necessary death.
He later adds, quote, "Emotional imitation is designed to arouse in us by means of sound the notion of the several passions of the heart, and to awaken solely through the sense of hearing the impressions that human beings experience only through the other senses, such as the goal of expression, depiction, or musical metaphors," unquote.
As a part of this, he uses an example of cyclical structure, an idea drawn from Beethoven's use of similar rhythmic structures in the Fifth Symphony, of course, and the idea of musical cycles, such as song cycle. Berlioz did not know of Mendelssohn's octet, which also uses this device. But of course, I mean, the clear example is Beethoven's Fifth, which the theme always comes back. The same thing here. The theme always comes back. I mean, it's pretty simple.
Motivic saturation.
Is that it?
That's all I've got. Yeah.
Great. This wraps up another episode. If you have any questions or suggestions or anything that you want to tell us, write to us at symphonicpodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on iTunes. You can find us on YouTube. You can rate us and like us if you want. And I think that's good. We'll see you next week. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening.